This is Pennsylvania Avenue, Washington, D.C., the 20th of January 2001, which was the inauguration of the Republican leader George W. Bush. Bush succeeded President Clinton by controversially beating Al Gore to the presidency back in the year 2000. On the election night of November 7th, 2000, the results came in at 246 votes to Republican candidate George W. Bush and 255 to Democrat Al Gore, giving the Democrats an overall lead. Despite this, the results in Florida were so close to call, a recount was triggered. During the recount, there were reports of large numbers of pro-Democrat African Americans being denied their vote as they were incorrectly listed as criminals and therefore denied their right to vote. This was a law that was shortly introduced before the election by the governor of Florida, Jeb Bush, George Bush's brother. And then, on November the 18th, it was declared that George W. Bush had won the state of Florida, resulting in him winning an overall majority and him becoming the 43rd president of the United States. Maybe George Bush did genuinely win the election, but don't you think it's rather suspicious that he won the revote of his state when his own brother was governor at the time? Despite mass unrest, no one could predict the chain of events following the former governor of Texas's appointment as president. In February of 2001, the new Bush administration invited the Taliban government of Afghanistan for talks in Texas regarding the construction of a pipeline from the Caspian Sea through Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and then into the Arabian Sea. It's estimated that the basin of the Caspian Sea contains around 48 billion barrels of oil. This is around about the same amount of oil as Libya has. The US had good relations with Turkmenistan and Pakistan. The only ones possibly stalling the deal would be the Taliban government of Afghanistan. When the Taliban insisted on higher transit fees than the White House were willing to offer, the situation turned ugly, and the Taliban were offered the ultimatum of either they accept the US's offer of a carpet of gold, or they'll be buried under a carpet of bombs. This is New York City in 2001, the largest city in the US and the symbol of the free world. An urban jungle that boasts one of the world's most extravagant skylines, numerous museums, parks, shopping streets, and trendy neighborhoods. Never did anyone think that this urban metropolis would be the scene of possibly the most significant point in history of the 21st century. But on September the 11th, 2001, American Airlines 11 and United Airlines 175 were flown into the World Trade Center in New York by so-called Al-Qaeda terrorists.
Oh my God! Jesus fucking Christ!
American Airlines 77 supposedly crashed into the Pentagon. Whilst the also so-called hijacked United 93 was supposedly retaken over by passengers and subsequently flown into the ground in a field in Somerset County, Pennsylvania. This was supposedly headed for the White House of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. And then, at 9:59 a.m., approximately 56 minutes after the plane hit, the South Tower collapsed. Followed by the North Tower at 10:28 a.m. after burning for approximately 102 minutes.
Yes, that is the second tower. That is the second
Now, as horrific as these scenes are, let's be honest to ourselves. Could two planes bring down two skyscrapers as high as 417 meters?
It came out like a plume of smoke, like a banana unpeeling, plumes of smoke coming out, and then absolutely nothing. And now where there were
If you think this is in any way suspicious, take a look at World Trade Center 7, collapsing shortly after the Twin Towers did. Which apparently collapsed from heavy debris falling on it from the Twin Towers. This is a controlled demolition of the Aladdin Hotel in Las Vegas. Now observe how similarly the building implodes on itself.
Oh, God. Look at that dust cloud, man!
Now listen to all of these eyewitnesses recalling hearing explosions shortly before the towers collapsed.
First plane or the second plane?
That was the first plane. The second plane, this is no second plane. It was a bomb. Bombed in the building, not second plane. That was a bomb.
So we were brought into another floor when there was another explosion, and they finally let us continue to go down.
What was happening around you? People screaming?
No, people were pretty calm. When we got down to 6th floor, there was like another shake or another explosion. Everyone started panicking, but
it just went ba-boom. It was like a bomb went off, and it was like holy hell coming down them stairs.
Like it sounded like gunfire, you know, bang, 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 and then all of a sudden 3 big explosions.
I was about 5 blocks away when I heard explosions, 3 thuds, and turned around to see the building we just got out of, antenna tip over and fall in on itself.
So multiple people recall hearing explosions shortly before the towers collapsed. So let's have a look at the Pentagon and the plane crashing in Pennsylvania in more depth and see if we can find anything else suspicious about these attacks. Now have a look at the damage caused by the apparent Boeing 757 hitting the Pentagon. If I'm honest, I'd expect a plane this size to cause slightly more catastrophic damage. So take a look back at the crash site of UA-93 that reportedly crashed into a field in Pennsylvania. Compare that lack of debris to the crash site of MH17, a Boeing 777 that was blown out of the sky by a missile over the Ukraine. Or Germanwings Flight 9525 that was deliberately flown into a mountain in the French Alps at full speed. In comparison to that of UA-93, these ones show obvious aeroplane fuselage. But why would the 43rd President of the United States slaughter 3,000 of his own people when it was his sole duty to protect and serve his citizens? For what? Well, remember Afghanistan and the botched pipeline deal with the Taliban?
But we condemn the Taliban regime.
The Bush administration were quick to blame the attacks on the so-called Al-Qaeda terrorist network, who was supposedly supported by the Taliban government of Afghanistan. And the Al-Qaeda frontrunner, Osama bin Laden, was to become the most wanted man in the world. A man whose family had close business ties with the Bushes. And then, on the 7th of October 2001, the US officially launched military operations in Afghanistan.
pony, I'm ready for the trail. I love the rolling prairies.
The Taliban was soon ousted, and the Americans installed Hamid Karzai as the new Western-friendly president of Afghanistan. With the new puppet government now installed, Bush turned his attention to a new target and turned his attention away from the world's most wanted man.
Of course we're after Saddam Hussein, bin Laden. He's isolated.
Not sure if isolated is the word I would use. There are even reports from reliable sources stating that bin Laden had died from natural causes back in December of 2001. So shortly after the situation in Afghanistan was considered stable, the Bush administration homed in on their new target, the population of America, by using one of their most effective weapons, fear-mongering.
They won't leave us alone. They will follow us to the United States of America. In the heart of this great city, we saw tragedy arrive on a quiet morning. September the 11th. September the 11th. September the 11th.
September 11th.
Saddam Hussein.
Saddam Hussein.
Saddam Hussein.
Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein.
Saddam.
War and danger.
Continuing danger.
Hour of danger.
Very, very dangerous world.
A grave new threat.
Horrific acts of atrocities. Murderous regimes dedicating to killing us. Tyranny and terror. Slaughtered thousands.
Weapons of mass destruction.
Weapons of mass destruction. Nuclear weapons.
Nuclear weapons.
Poison gas.
Torture chambers. Mass graves.
Deadly technologies.
Radical ideology of hate.
Terror.
Global terrorism.
Terrorism. Terrorism.
Terrorism. Terrorism.
Terrorism.
The evil terrorists. 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 Terrorists.
The United States knows that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. The UK knows that they have weapons of mass destruction. Any country on the face of the earth with an active intelligence program knows that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction.
Which could be activated within 45 minutes, including against his own Shia population.
The choice is his. And if he does not disarm, the United States of America will lead a coalition and disarm him in the name of peace.
Despite the horrific fear-mongering from the US and the UK, on February the 15th, 2003, there were mass protests across the world in which millions of people expressed their opposition to the imminent invasion of Iraq. This is the protest of 100,000 people in New York City.
We say no! We had 49th, and it's like 20 blocks where we're
And this is London, where 750,000 people gathered. Despite mass unrest across the globe, George Bush did the inevitable, and on the 19th of March 2003, he announced the beginning of Operation Iraqi Freedom, the declaration of war on Saddam Hussein and Iraq, a country that never posed any threat to the West.
My fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger. On my orders, coalition forces have begun striking selected targets of military importance to undermine Saddam Hussein's ability to wage war. The enemies you confront will come to know your skill and bravery.
Come on, fire!
The people you liberate will witness the honorable and decent spirit of the American military.
You got that? You want some water? Water? Mike? Mike, keep running. Here.
I want Americans and all the world to know that coalition forces will make every effort to spare innocent civilians from harm. We come to Iraq with respect for its citizens. For their great civilization and for the religious faiths they practice. We have no ambition in Iraq except to remove a threat and restore control of that country to its own people. May God bless our country and all who defend her.
And with a coalition of 360,000 troops fronted by the US, the UK, Australia and Poland, the invasion of Iraq began. The invasion was swift and lasted around 3 weeks, which resulted in the collapse of the Iraqi government and military. This included the fall of the capital Baghdad and the desertion of Saddam Hussein. The oil infrastructure was soon secured, with fairly limited damage, although some Iraqis tried to stop the coalition from getting their hands on their prized target by setting fire to the oil fields. And on the 1st of May, Bush announced victory for the West.
Americans, major combat operations in Iraq have ended. In the Battle of Iraq, the United States and our allies have prevailed.
Despite the media covering this as a liberation, the Iraqis had other ideas, and Bush's announcement marked the beginning of a bloody conflict between the coalition and Iraqi insurgents. As Iraq's infrastructure was dealt a severe blow from all the fighting, somebody would have to rebuild the country. Would it not make sense to help the local economy and give Iraqi companies the contracts to reconstruct the country? No. All the companies that would rebuild Iraq would be mostly American, with some other companies from Kuwait also getting their share. The biggest profiter of all was Halliburton, who raked in $39.5 billion, and whose CEO was none other than Dick Cheney, the Vice President of the US at the time. And the reason for the war turned out to be a complete farce, as the only weapons of mass destruction found were the ones the US used against the Iraqis in Fallujah. So what happened in Afghanistan? Well, as everyone forgot about it and concentrated on Iraq, the Taliban retook a load of ground, and the war still wages as of today. The oil pipeline deal never went through, but a gas pipeline deal from the Caspian Sea was sealed by the Asian Development Bank, a Filipino company which seems to be at the expense of the West. Construction started in December 2015, and it should be operational by 2019. So in the long run, who benefited from the wars? Unfortunately, it was only the elite 1% of society, the 1% involved in companies like Halliburton. Iraq lost an estimated 600,000 citizens. In Afghanistan, it's estimated that around 26,000 civilians were killed. In terms of soldiers, an estimated 7,300 coalition soldiers were killed in both conflicts, some of which were sent to war at the age of 18. That's not including the local security forces. The ultra-rich benefited from the war on terror, and the average person suffered. And look at the culprits. Do you think they ever have trouble sleeping at night? Will the truth ever come out and bring them to justice? We can only live in hope.